very original concept, and he really knows how to use paint.
I agree. Lots of power and vitality.
Oh, questo è una da mangiare sfilatini.
Va via, bestiaccia.
È calmo come l'olio.
Non so perché, ma detesto i paragoni in cui entra l'olio.
Buongiorno. Ben alzata. Claudia! Guarda! Mamma mia! Dormito bene? Così. Ieri sera sono andata a letto con l'idea di pensare a una quantità di cose. Poi mi sono addormentata. Io non sapevo che si dormisse così bene su questi affari qua. Ti cullano.
Io ho dormito malissimo. Salute! Ciao.
Buongiorno. Prendi il sole piuttosto.
Facciamo il bagno?
Non qui, è pauroso.
vulcani?
Pensa che 12 anni fa, quando io e te siamo venuti qui, hai detto la stessa cosa.
Come si chiama questa qui?
Deve essere Basiluzzo.
Basiluzzo. Sembra il nome di un pesce.
Quella invece è l'isca bianca.
Uffa, che noia! Quante storie per un bagno!
Anna! Ma... attendete!
Mario! Una donna in mare!
I'm the director of the undergraduate program. There are a lot of you out there from other schools, I've noticed, and welcome to SCI-Arc. We have a very unique lecturer tonight, a really special lecturer that I think many of you should know that you will be forever indebted to her. She has been in solo practice, or is in solo practice, is a 100% women-owned firm, and has somehow or other managed to build buildings as a woman, and build buildings in a city where that's hard to do as an architect. And she's, I think, sort of maybe changed a lot of people's expectations about women architects and their role, that they aren't just sort of a subservient partner to a spouse or partner, but in fact can be solo practitioners, build real buildings, build big big institutional buildings. And so I think there's something that she's done for people that will come after her and benefit from the fact that she's kind of defined that this is a possibility in this city. She's also done a lot of other stuff. She's taught at, does teach in studio at USC and has taught at Cal Poly Pomona. She's been really active in all those kind of professional organizations that the AIA, the local chapter of the AIA, she's been the, has been or is the president, past president, okay, of the local chapter of the AIA, which is remarkable again as a woman. She's also been the president of the Association of Women in Architecture. She's very active in the LA chapter of the AIA's Urban Design Committee. She's a member of the College of the Fellows of the American Institute of Architecture. And so she's very unique. I don't know how else to say it. So for me, it's a real pleasure. There are not very many people that I've encountered, you know, of my gender and my age and my profession that are out there doing it, and she's really sort of noteworthy in that. So I'd like to welcome Kate Diamond, and here she is.
You guys have got to work on the acoustics of your room. It's a real pleasure to be here, and more than a little bit intimidating. SCI-Arc sets a standard and is a place that is memorable in Los Angeles, and has been since I was a student. I actually went to school in Israel, and I've decided actually to structure my lecture today not just as a set of presentation of our projects, but a bit of a personal history, because I think I have chosen a unique path to get to the point where I am beginning to explore excellence in architecture. And I want to share with you the fact that there are multiple ways to get to do meaningful work and to explore architecture. There are just all kinds of different choices that you can make. In 1970, while I was accepted at good schools of architecture here in the United States, I needed to put several thousand miles between my father and myself and Richard Nixon and myself. So I left the United States and went to Israel and spent almost 10 years in Israel. Can we have the slides on, or do I turn it on by? And Israel is a remarkable place. The light is incredible. Jerusalem is stunningly beautiful. History is 4,000 to 10,000 years. It's not about historic buildings that are 50 years old, but historic buildings and historic places where human beings have walked for 5,000, 10,000 years. And more importantly, studying in Israel and then getting my first architectural experience in the Israeli Air Force, and then practicing for a short period in Israel, taught me to challenge all of the sets of assumptions about America as the only way of doing things. We have a tendency to kind of assume that the whole world wants to be American. Just because the exports of Disney and Hollywood are wildly successful doesn't mean that we do it the best or the only way, or that the whole world wants to emulate us. And I would argue that there's an awful lot we could learn from other places in the world. I came back to Los Angeles in 1979, and I must say I adore Los Angeles. I love it. I think it's crazy, insane, intense. It's the Wild West. It's open in many ways that no other place is open. I really believe that it was possible for me to participate here both as a woman architect and as an outsider in ways that I could not possibly have done in Boston or New York or London or in Israel, where there is a much more established set of connections and hierarchy of places and people and history that you need to have in order to have those connections. So I arrived back here not having gone the standard route already. I hadn't gone to SCI-Arc or Harvard or Yale, and I hadn't studied with the sets of professors or used the language that's used here. When I went to school in Israel, I tended to speak baby talk because I didn't know any Hebrew when I went there. And so your explanation of projects is much more basic. You don't learn fancy architectural jingo because you don't know the language well enough to handle just basic explanations. And when I came back here, my language was sorely lacking in academic architect talk. And I didn't go immediately to work for an important architect here in Los Angeles. Sometimes I regret that because I think I could have learned an awful lot from working with someone who was really on the edge of explorations that were important. But I'm very bad at taking direction, and I'm very bad at doing other people's work. So I'd rather work, and chose to work, in a solid but mediocre firm where I was allowed to do essentially whatever the hell I felt like doing as long as the client was happy. And I was kind of frustrated with architecture and felt that American architecture tended to put interns and junior architects into a sort of draftsmanship position that was really boring. You've got to get through your internship very quickly in order to survive the pressures of this profession, because what took you into school and the exciting ideas you're exploring have very little to do with what you're put to do in the first year or two that you go to work in an architectural office. And so I almost left architecture. I actually got accepted to UCLA to do a PhD in psychology, and I was working with autistic children and teaching language, and was working 30 hours a week as a part-time architect, and was a full-time graduate student. And one day we got a chance to go after a project which was a Jewish community center with a senior center component, a child care component, from programming through master planning, through design, through construction documents. And we were part of an invited list of about 20. And I wanted it so bad. And the reason we were invited was essentially a combination of the firm's experience doing YMCAs and my personal experience in Israel working on projects for the Air Force and my connection to the Jewish community. And so my bosses allowed me to take the lead in going after this project. And we were shortlisted from the 20 to 7, and shortlisted again from the 7 to 4, and we came in second and we didn't get it. And I was deeply depressed and frustrated and was trying to decide what I wanted to be when I grew up, and decided that I wanted to be an architect, and that there wasn't time to be both a good clinical psychologist and an architect, and that I would take the skills I had acquired in clinical psychology and apply them to my clients when I went back to architecture, but that I would go back full bore into architecture. 6 months later, I entered into discussion with Margot Siegel and Norma Sklarek, and we decided to form a partnership. And the first project that we went after was a project for a small addition down at UC Irvine. My career has always been atypical and somewhat backwards. I have never done a small addition to a house. The first custom home I did in the last year and a half. We did institutional projects from the very beginning, but when you're a small practice, you get hired for really messy additions to nasty, ugly buildings. The existing building over there is really lovely. It's sort of a bad plaster imitation of Pereira's really bad concrete buildings down at UC Irvine. And to this, we had to do an addition. And this was in the period of time when David Newman was campus architect down at UC Irvine. And David was making a really important pitch for quality architecture and quality design. And this takes me to my sort of second theme of the presentation, which is that not only can you weave your own path through architecture, but that we all need to be working to develop a constituency that gives a damn about design. The day after the ad appeared in the Los Angeles Times with all of our signatures supporting Frank Gehry's project and saying that it matters to build Disney Hall is a good day to be discussing how we would build some kind of sensitivity and sensibility in public institutional clients to raise the level of concern for design. I can assure you that the vast majority of the clients down at Irvine were not selecting people on the basis of design. They were selecting people on the basis of service. And our service, and the reason we were selected, is we went and discovered, and I'm going to attempt this. My hands tend to shake when I give lectures, so if I'm too wobbly, I'll give up. But there is an inactive earthquake fault that runs back here, and originally they had wanted to do the addition behind the existing building and put it right smack on top of the inactive earthquake fault. And of the 7 shortlisted firms, we were the only firm that went down and discovered the inactive earthquake fault and said, bad idea, you'll spend your entire budget on your foundation. The other part that we said was that they needed to address urban design concerns. My degree is actually in architecture and town planning, and I have always designed from a focus on urban design and town planning concerns. And in this case, it was a case of energizing the pedestrian ring, which is the organizing factor at Irvine, which has most of the older buildings are set back so far from it that there's no pedestrian edge to it. And so not only did we propose that we should come forward from the really bad idea of sitting on an inactive earthquake fault, but we also proposed that we should reinforce the urban edge. It seemed to me that when you do an addition to an existing building, you have a sort of continuum of choices. You can either mimic the style of the existing building, or you can contrast with it. And somewhere along that line and point in time, you generally make a choice as to your design approach. In this particular case, we chose to express the whole continuum so that when we're next to the adjacent existing building, we mimic it in mass and scale. As we move away from it, we begin to completely erode that idiom and develop a completely new face and elevation for our building. These buildings were built with very small budgets, with essentially no opportunity for addition of detail beyond the minimum that's required. So your code required handrail, the code required elevator to provide handicapped access, and daylighting become the primary energizers and decorators of the interior atrium space. From there, we went on to another excruciatingly messy remodel at UCLA of scrunching parking services, which is a banking facility doing $5 million worth of banking, into an existing parking structure. And you need to understand that most institutional clients, again, are not discussing design. The fact that I was using the discussion of gas stations and movie theaters, drive-in movie theaters, as part of the partie for designing the entrance canopy to parking structures is completely irrelevant to the folks in parking services. The only thing they want to know is, does the banking facility and the lines for the students really work? And maybe we need to find ways to make sure that we're discussing things in our clients' terms at the same time that we raise their confidence level that they need to believe in us for the exploration of architecture. Next project of the UC series was a small childcare center. Primary reason we got it was we could convince them that we could meet the schedule, which was 9 months from design through, a year from design through completion of construction. Again, extremely low budgets, pushing the envelope of design here at our expense, certainly not because that was a primary concern or consideration of the client. I would say that by the time this project on your left, my right, is a project now under construction at Scripps, which is a small steel-framed building stepping up the hill. By the time we finally got to this one, which is about a $3.5 million, $4 million mixed-use project, we were finally being selected at least partially for design and for the ability to work within a really complicated and specific site conditions and constraints. We started the design of a project that was on a really beautiful site at UC Santa Barbara, but it turned out it would take 2 years to de-water that site, so that the project was abandoned and we moved on. The first project, and it has taken me 10 years to get to the point where we were selected for design. Let me go back. Well, have we? Okay. So you'll put it in correctly for me, thank you. Every lecture has to have at least one backward slide or it doesn't qualify. The first project that we were selected for, a UC project based on design consideration, was for a very strange building type. It was for a new central plant for the UC Davis Medical Center, which is basically a building housing big, ugly machinery, kind of neat machinery if you really want to get to it, but big, heavy-duty machinery supplying chilled water and hot water and electricity to the campus. And it's an interesting design constraint precisely because it has urban design constraints. It's located on a primary entrance to the campus, adjacent to a residential neighborhood. The neighbors were very unhappy about having a big central plant, a big industrial plant next door to them. And so the campus committed to hire a design architect to team with the production architect and engineers that they had there. And while Antoine Predock got the enlarged project at UC Santa Barbara that I lost, I beat him on this one. So it became a unique opportunity, perhaps a little bit less of an opportunity to showcase what I think is beautiful about the industrial reality of the project, but nevertheless an interesting and important exploration of what makes a central plant as a machine really work and really tick. in this kind of a project, if you don't place the right proximity between two pieces of equipment and you're dealing with pipes that are 5 foot in diameter connecting them, you can blow your budget just in the relationship of the pipes that you've put in there. In the last couple of years, I've tended to develop a series of layers of explanations for why I'm doing things. And I tell them to myself, I don't necessarily tell them to the client, because the client could be made excruciatingly uncomfortable if we insist on telling them all of our architectural stories. I was really interested in the cogeneration process, which is called an energy cascade. You start with one form of energy, you run it through a turbine, you produce electricity, you take the hot water or the steam rather that's generated from that, you run it through another kind of turbine, you produce more electricity, then you take the byproduct of that, the reduced energy, you continue to reuse and reuse. It's an extremely efficient method of taking the maximum energy out of a process. And so the cow wall wedge and the form here came off of the metaphor of the energy cascade that is the event that's occurring behind the scene here. But it's equally about the fact that the cow wall provides daylighting so that we don't have to turn a single light on in the factory during the day. And the cow wall becomes expressive at night of the fact that this is a 24-hour facility, and so therefore it is backlit and tells you that the building is alive and active. It is also about the fact that this used to be the site of the old state fairgrounds, and they used to have barns and wonderful agricultural exhibits. And so all of the materials of this project, other than the cow wall, are really concrete block and corrugated metal and the kinds of shapes and forms that would have made barns and would have been part of that kind of experience. The windows also showcase all of the equipment, and we even have an opening down to the basement so that you actually see the 5-foot diameter pipes leaving the building carrying the hot water out to the campus. I did try to convince them to kind of weave that through the landscape of the campus and make it visible as part of the infrastructure, as part of the design, but I lost in that discussion. Another client that we've had for the past 10 years that we have developed a relationship and grown their design ability and aesthetic and their willingness to even consider design issues is LA Unified School District. You haven't had the pleasure or misfortune of working with LA Unified School District yet, but I'll tell you that doing a $2.5 million addition to a building, an elementary school takes 10 years, which means that you lose your shirt and you, by the time it's done, you also are really tired of what you did 10 years ago, so it's really frustrating. This project, we took to the project manager and project architect at the district, and we took the elevation and we said, we want to take this to the board and what do you think? Are they going to approve it? Because we'd heard rumors that the board was turning down architects right and left and sending them back to the drawing board and insisting that they redo things. And I have to tell you that everything I saw that was up on the walls and everything that was coming out and being built by LA Unified School District was total, complete white bread vanilla. And I didn't know what would happen when we took this in. The nature of the funding process of the schools is from the state, and they have really stupid rules that go by square footage and not by any kind of logic of quality. So you have to play this kind of silly game, and then you ultimately get the opportunity to hopefully make a little bit of architecture on the edges of the process. We were really lucky that the school board actually, it turns out that the board members were really looking for schools that were wonderful places for children, and therefore they were enthusiastic about it. And we were able to finally, in the last 6 months, complete this first project that we did for LA Unified School District. The next project we got for LA Unified School District was a junior high school addition, and we started with what could only be described as a sort of war-torn asphalt courtyard that was sort of excruciatingly tortured, and have defined and designed a building very simple that recreates a courtyard and makes a new place and starts to define the edges. One of the interesting things here is that the older historic buildings of the school were used regularly for filming, and so we had to stay away from those edges because that was the only way they could pay for art and music and other components at the school. So you never know what's going to become part of the constraints of an architectural project, because I certainly didn't want to get in the way of funding for the arts at a junior high school in the middle of our city. The next project we did for LA Unified School District was a complete elementary school that's never been built. It has in it seeds of ideas that I think are really important for schools here in the city, and that I've begun to campaign to try to make happen here, because it's a shared use facility that is a total community center that is sited in a park that reduces the footprint of the school from the typical 8 acres to 3 acres, that pulls out the library so that the library can serve over here. There's a front door that's a public entrance and a back door that's the school entrance. It has a separation here so that the entire multi-purpose room gymnasium component could be reused as part of a community center component. So thinking in terms of social responsibility, we've been attempting to redefine the nature of the program of architecture for the LA Unified School District. Another key piece here is that security is an excruciating problem, and so these elements are actually garage doors that open to become a trellis during the day, and at night close down and become security screens that lock the place up completely tightly, because everything walks off of public school campuses. One other feature I would mention is that when you deal with clients like LA Unified School District, you do one set of renderings for the client and one set of presentation drawings for yourself as an architect, because the client needs those that they feel comfortable and are touchy-feely and have children in them, and they don't really reflect the way we would typically present and be interested in an architectural project. Coming out of this, we went into the competition that Tom Main won for the Science Museum Elementary School on the grounds of the Museum of Science and Industry, and explored what I think was a really interesting relationship here of defining a precinct, creating a central courtyard that was the central classroom for the entire school, that had some really key features, and some really interesting ideas about flexibility and the integration of art into, and science as art into the nature of schools and places for children. We were recently hired by the City of Glendale to do a park expansion, community center, new library, and new elementary school, and I think I'm finally going to get to use a lot of the ideas embedded in both of these projects, as well as take them to the next level and next stage. I wanted to talk in the introduction. Heather mentioned that I've been very active in the urban design area in Los Angeles, and I really want to talk a little bit about that. I said to you I adore Los Angeles, and I really do. I had the opportunity to go with several good friends, Rob McGuire as president of the Board of Trustees of LACMA, Ira Yellen as president then of the American Jewish Congress, Jamie McCormick, past president of the West Side Urban Forum, Mark Winogrand, then president of the American Planning Association, and myself representing the AIA, to go argue in person with Henry Waxman that he was distorting and destroying city form by erroneously insisting on relocating the Wilshire alignment of the Metro Rail. And I really believe that as architects we have fallen down in taking our responsibility in expressing a commitment to city form. Every time I fly into Los Angeles, I marvel at the exquisite beauty of the map of lights and stars that kind of blanket our valley, and you fly in and it really is gorgeous, but we need to remember what that means in sustainable terms, that we live in a desert that we've taken over and filled with single-family homes, that we pretend that the measure of Los Angeles and the goals of Los Angeles, we allow people to define our vision in terms of a Los Angeles of the 1950s. Remember that the women who lived in those houses were left behind and died of boredom and drink, and that there isn't a single minority face on that block. And I would celebrate rather the Los Angeles of this sorry little public library, defaced as it is with graffiti. Isn't it fabulous that it has to give its sign and its expression in 3 languages and express what we are today? And shouldn't we really embrace and challenge those kinds of issues and challenges? Isn't it our responsibility to tell Los Angeles that density doesn't mean this kind of monstrosity, that we have a responsibility to create an alternative vision to row upon row of tract houses? Isn't it our job to be changing the debate and engaging the debate about Los Angeles and its form? Isn't it our job to be in there addressing the argument of the car versus fixed rail versus the bus, being participants in the debate? I personally believe that we have seriously and deeply underfunded our bus system, that we have abused the riders on the buses and treated them as third-class citizens at best, but that it doesn't mean that we don't need a fixed rail system in addition, that the changing vision of Los Angeles will in fact require fixed rail, that we need to deal with density differently than the buses have in the past. And I have therefore been proud to participate as an architect in the development of our rail system. The original line, it drives me nuts. We have a system that goes essentially to none of the right places. It goes past USC, which is the single largest private employer in Los Angeles County. So it can't bring the employees or the students or the faculty to USC. It doesn't go to the Hollywood Bowl. It doesn't go to the airport. And if we don't watch out, it isn't going to go down Wilshire and serve the Miracle Mile and the density that already exists there. We are allowing politicians to shape the vision of our city, and we need to make sure that we as architects and urban planners and people who care and understand the form of the city make sure that they hear our voice. You have no idea the battle I had to get that minimal texture on the concrete walls of the original Blue Line stations. The Blue Line was an expediency line. It was put in to demonstrate that light rail in Los Angeles could be built, could be run without having major crime problems. It was put through the neighborhoods of least resistance that couldn't muster, look at what the neighborhood is. Nobody's going to complain about the light rail going through there, and the neighborhoods of Watts and the other neighborhoods where it legitimately they should have complained were not organized to do so. And so the attitude of the then SCRTD was to do something absolutely minimal. We tried, despite those limitations, to give a minimal sense of place with extraordinary constraints and absolutely no commitment to design. There isn't, to this day, anyone involved in the design of our metro rail system that is a voice for architecture. There is a strong voice for the involvement of public artists. Maya Emsden does an excellent job of representing the artists in the process. But there are engineers running the process and politicians running the engineers and no one speaking for architecture or urban placemaking. The next transit project we got was a little teeny tiny commuter rail station in Baldwin Park where the city chose to take back their own control over the process, and they chose to hire their own architect, us, and to engage Judy Baca as the artist to collaborate with us. They also came to me with an extraordinary and unreasonable request that I do a Spanish mission-style station. And in case you hadn't noticed, commuter rail stations have only passive security, which means that basically they need to be as invisible as possible. And I think Spanish mission style is generally about walls. There isn't a wall in the place. The community also selected the artist, Judy Baca, who is a muralist who's never worked in any other medium other than painting on walls. So we had a little bit of educational process in the collaboration here. We did the playful kinds of shelters here, and we collaborated with Judy on the development of the train platform, which is the site plans of 6 of the California missions overlaid with the dance steps of the Chumash Indians and with information about the number of Indians who lived and worked and died at each of the missions. The next station we were involved with was the Universal City Metro Rail Station, which for years our friends at Universal City had said they didn't want to have it near them because their people weren't going to ride on a metro rail, and because it was just going to bring commuter traffic in, and it was just going to be noisy, and construction would be a problem, and they didn't want it next to them, and they sued the MTA, and they fought the MTA, and they opposed the station at every turn. Then they decided that they wanted to expand City Walk, and because City Walk up until that point had been built entirely or almost entirely on county property, and the county hadn't required them to develop an EIR, but they had run out of county land, and so now they needed to put it onto city property. They went to the city to explain how good it would be to allow them to expand City Walk, and the city, thank God, said, prepare a master plan for your development. And so Rem Koolhaas, as you know, is presently working on that master plan for Universal City. The same day they went to the city and were told they needed to prepare a master plan, they decided that not only did they like the metro rail station, but they wanted it moved down from the bottom of the hill where it served a variety of users, up smack into the middle of their property, held us up for 6 months fighting about that. Then they won a concession for the MTA so that this station that they had been fighting for 6 months suddenly had no financial benefit to them, and they no longer have to participate in the tax benefit assessment for the station. So they agreed to move it back down to where it was originally. We were finally allowed to design the station. I do hope that they will take proper advantage of it and develop a people mover that will take people up the hill and engage people in a different mode of transportation here. I show you this very weird rendering on your right because this is part of the way that I work with institutional clients. We were told we couldn't design the plaza level of the station as we were designing all the rest of it. We were going to play Alice in Wonderland and design from the rabbit hole down, because the streets were moving in such a way, and there were big negotiations between Caltrans and DOT and all these other things, and they didn't want us to have to redesign, so they were doing us a favor. We couldn't design the plaza. But when it came time for the public presentation, they told me I had to do a rendering of the plaza level. And I said, well, I can't do a rendering of the plaza level because we've only designed the elevator entrance to the station. We haven't designed the plaza. They said, you have to, it's in your contract. So I did a rendering. And I said, when you tell me to design the rest of it, I'll fill in the rest of the rendering. And I want to tell you that it was also extraordinarily effective because the community said, where's the plaza and the planting and the other pieces? And I suspect that we would not actually have been hired to design those pieces if I hadn't been quite so difficult and hadn't presented them with a bit of a fait accompli as far as this presentation. This station was designed, we were the architects on the Sverdrup engineering team, and the artist we were collaborating with was Margaret Garcia, and we really had a very good time working together. Almost all of this is sort of equally both of our hands. This is a project I could never have designed myself. It's way too Baroque. On the other hand, it's a project that's a wonderful celebration and has a really fabulous sense of place. So I've enjoyed that kind of expansion and exploration. One of the things we did, because I've lived in cities where I certainly have used transit, is a lot of the present stations put all of their artwork in the entry connection piece. And the truth is, you never stop when you are going to a train. You run to a train, you know? And then the only time you would actually stop and look at artwork is if you were stuck waiting for the train. So we put all of the intensity of our artwork directly down on the platform. I've shown you this slide because it really shows a kind of evolution and collaborative process here. Margaret had been bringing in books about textiles in Mexico and other places, and it was really very exciting and interesting. And Andrea Rawlings, my project architect and SCI-Arc graduate, I should add, really liked the pattern that was here on one of the books, and it turns out that it's a pattern that is a symbol for infinity, which Margaret and I both liked. And it also turns out, which Margaret discovered before I did, that it was a diamond shape, around a G. So it was really putting our initials and graffiti all over the entire station. So we decided to graffiti the station, and we started to explore how and where and in what materials. Margaret did this painting, and we took a photograph of that and started playing with the Xerox version of that. And then we took the Xerox and went out and made 100 different little small Xeroxes, looking at the idea of keeping the quality of a hand-fabricated kind of relief within the context of something that was completely machine fabricated. You need to understand the scale of this. This is 450 feet long, 70 feet tall. So there's no way Margaret was going to sit there and paint every one of these. This must be completely fabricated by a contractor. So we really started working with a contractor that did silk screening on stainless steel, of baked enamel on stainless steel panels. And this is a sample of that. We started doing rubbings, and this is a blueprint off of one of the rubbings that would allow us to get that kind of variation and to create a pattern that was non-directional, that we could stack in different ways, that if one of the panels turned out to be damaged, you could remove it and replace it with another one and have the variation inherent in the form and really work with that. Then we started to play with it on the glass. So this is frit glass over here. And we started to develop a custom cast iron piece for the handrails. And we really did this entirely in collaborative effort, working back and forth. Margaret would do an iteration, I would do an iteration. It was great fun and a wonderful exploration of materials. We were also exploring this sort of metaphor of these trees within our subterranean space. It's a wonderful 70-foot tall space here, and the tree trunk becomes a place that Margaret will be doing custom tile to write the history of the signing of the capitulation of Cahuenga. I should mention that when we first got the job, we were both called in to meet with the head honchos of the EMC, the engineering management consultants, who had come up with a brilliant notion that because we were across the street from Universal Studios, we should do a themed metro rail station. And the theme was going to be an old New York subway. And why should we do an old New York subway? Because the head guys at the MTA, Ed McSpedden and some of the others, were from New York. The only problem with that concept, beyond the fact that old New York subways are ugly, and I don't believe that real public space should be themed, is the fact that we happen to be on one of the most historic sites west of the Mississippi, the site of the signing of the capitulation of Cahuenga, where Pio Pico gave California to John C. Fremont. And so one of the things you have to learn with artists is that they're not as good at politics as architects. So I've learned whenever I go with an artist to a meeting where they're likely to get upset, I sit them really close to me so I can kick them under the table. And as Margaret started baring her teeth and kind of frothing at the mouth when they went on about the New York subway, I kicked her under the table. We left, and I said we'd consider it seriously. We considered it seriously for 3 minutes, and then we went on our business. I got into big trouble with the guys because I was supposed to have done a New York subway, and I asked them if they'd like to explain to Gloria Molina and Richard Alatorre and others that California history wasn't really relevant. So our subway station is presently under construction. It's an extraordinary big hole in the ground. And if Tudor Saliba doesn't destroy it in the process, I think we'll have a wonderful kind of celebration of history and place. It was a really exciting place to play with materials. We have a custom cast iron base on the column and other elements there, and I really look forward to the exuberance and the, as I said, the Baroque quality of that place. I said at the beginning of the lecture, my career has been backwards. Most people do custom homes and develop a reputation for the making of beautiful places and evolve from that, grow into the commercial and institutional work that is our bread and butter. This was the first time I ever got a house, and actually the clients interviewed some 20 architects and liked the air traffic control tower and decided I could do their house because they liked the air traffic control tower. I really appreciate their creativity and their willingness to go beyond the obvious and allow me to have this opportunity to go through this exploration with them. And they were, in fact, really wonderful clients, and it was great fun. This was more of a collaboration with the structural engineer, Mike Ishler, who is an ex-Ov Arab, expatriate type, well, he's an American Ov Arab type, but he is the kind of engineer where you can really discuss the nature of structure, and of structure as the essential form giver and creator of place. And so Mike came up with, or together we came up with this really beautiful framing system, and the house was a great deal of fun. Again, in addition to the kind of quality of placemaking, it was wonderful to be playing with materials and a quality of detailing that you really can't do when your budget is limited to vinyl tile. There are limitations to vinyl tile. I'm trying to figure out ways around vinyl tile, but school district kinds of budgets really don't lend themselves to better solutions. In this case, the stair is a beautiful cantilevered structure coming out of a Venetian plaster wall, and the treads are limestone spanning between them. The bridge across shows you that structural reality, and it was a lot of fun to play with. And obviously, the air traffic control tower was a major and important turning place in my career. It's a little scary to build such a significant monument at a relatively early age. I hope I will have opportunities to do projects equally exciting and equally significant as we move along. And there are a couple people here that I really need to recognize, because in that discussion about how one creates a culture that values excellence, the only reason that I got to do the air traffic control tower was because the LA City Commission, Cultural Affairs Commission, refused to approve projects by the previous architect that looked a lot like this. The FAA has a prototype designed for an air traffic control tower, and the previous architect kept doing kind of gaudier and gaudier base buildings and kept putting in the standard prototype design for the tower, and kept not getting it approved by the Cultural Affairs Commission and by the Mayor's Design Advisory Panel. And Elise Grinstein is here, and she was chair at that point in time of the Cultural Affairs Commission. And Michael is here, and he was actively on the Mayor's Design Advisory Panel. And without that kind of commitment, and that commitment has been seriously eroded by our present mayor, who does not support the commission as a key and vital part to making Los Angeles an excellent place, we would have this building and this tower. I talked about the idea, when we were brought on board, our charge, Holmes and Narver had been selected to replace the architect of record that had previously attempted for 5 years to get an approval through the Cultural Affairs Commission. And Holmes and Narver took a set of designs down to the Cultural Affairs Commission, and Elise was good enough, and everyone else there was good enough to turn them down too. And so they were told by the FAA to go out and hire a design architect because they were tired of the process. And the federal government, in reality, could come down and say, to hell with Los Angeles and your Cultural Affairs Commission, we're the feds, we don't want to do it, we're going to put up whatever we feel like. But they wanted to be good neighbors, and they wanted to give it one last chance. So they told Holmes and Narver, go find someone, and you've got 4 months to get an approval. They've been playing with it for 10 years, but I got 4 months. And when I was selected, you need to understand that it was not an open selection process. I was selected because I'd paid my dues and was perceived as having political connections to the Cultural Affairs Commission. At the time, I was a commissioner on the Board of Zoning Appeals of the City of Los Angeles, and my friend Deborah was responsible for a lot of hours I put in there. And so everyone thought that I ought to know the Cultural Affairs Commissioners. The truth is, I'd never met Elise. I'd never met anyone on the Cultural Affairs Commission, but I neglected to mention that to Holmes and Narver. They asked me if I could get this through and get it approved, and I said I could. And we sat down and we took that prototype tower and we said, what about this? If we have only 4 months, you can't start and do a complete exploration about the meaning of an air traffic control tower in 4 months. You can't rethink the structural design in 4 months. You can't think about some of the essential basic components. But you can decide where your degrees of flexibility are. So the first thing we did was we literally deconstructed this existing design. We tore it apart and we sat there with our client and we said, which of these decisions are critical functional decisions and which of these decisions are arbitrary decisions that the designer of this prototype put on? Things like the fact that their radar balconies are hidden behind screens and encapsulated within the constraints of the tower. That's not functional. They hated it, the FAA. They were really happy when we stuck the balconies out so that they could point the radar in the correct direction. So we were dissecting what we could do and how we could do it. And because the stories that architects tell themselves have to do with what is making a symbol of arrival in Los Angeles. And the palm tree, while it's not native, is a ubiquitous symbol of Los Angeles. And here we were with this very weird building type. You know, it's essentially a huge stalk with 2 occupied floors at the top. That's it. Nothing else in the middle of it. Los Angeles is also home to an extraordinary heritage of construction, fabrication, manufacturing of aeronautics, aerospace, moon landing gear, and everything else. And I went looking at all of those pieces. And so we came up with this sort of hybrid of the struts of a biplane and the organic qualities of the palm tree. And every time I would tell any of those stories to the air traffic controllers, they wouldn't just make faces. They would tell me that it was okay, the building was disgustingly weird, and they were really lucky because they were going to be occupying it and they wouldn't have to look at it. But if I could get it through that weird Cultural Affairs Commission, that was okay because the primary hindrance here, they didn't give a damn about design. The primary hindrance was the Cultural Affairs Commission was holding them up and they couldn't build a tower that was tall enough to oversee the airport. I mean, I hate to tell you how much they couldn't see from the old tower. And they couldn't put the new equipment in, and they'd been fighting with it for 10 years. So they were tired of that game. So what I did was every one of those rooms on the air traffic control tower is a simple rectangle. These guys could not cope, and they were men and women, but they were equally rigid. They could not cope with the concept of weird shapes of rooms. All of what we are doing that makes the tower a special place is in the 3-dimensional form that doesn't get in the way of their notion of function. You must find a way to find a language with your client that is an acceptable process. As I said before, one of the first and critical things we did was take the radar balconies, put them at the right height, and pull them out of the trunk of the tower so that they could face in the correct direction for the airport and really serve the functional needs of the FAA. The first and only person who supported the design for the first 2 months was this great little engineer who said, well, you know, it's a weird-looking building, but it's really functional. That was the total extent of support that I had from the FAA. I will say, on the other hand, that when I would take the original and initial sketches into the Cultural Affairs Commission, the commission was unanimously enthusiastic. Michael was in there telling them that they had to let me build more models and have a good time, and I was building more models, and they were thinking I was really weird. So there was this bifurcation. In effect, I had 2 clients. And one of the things that really works is when your client has, in fact, multiple people who represent different voices and have different critical concerns. If you can find that kind of client and one of them cares about design, then you can satisfy the functional requirements of the other client parts and make something really happen. It's difficult to talk over that. It's really nice how we all assume that it's irrelevant that the alarm is going off, right? Huh? Well, Andrea told me that it was always very noisy when you lecture at SCI-Arc, and I shouldn't take offense, but I don't think that's what she meant. The second critical component to the success of getting the air traffic control tower approved was really contextual and urban design aspects. The theme restaurant, which I have to admit until I started designing, I really didn't like. And it kind of grows on you when you're forced to deal with it. It's still really weird, but it's really a wonderful part of the weirdness of Los Angeles. And so in accepting it and recognizing what a critical component it was to the composition of the tower and the center of our airport, I really worked with that kind of aspect, which I believe was a critical part of the approvals from the Cultural Affairs Commission. So here I was, with the Cultural Affairs Commission approving it enthusiastically, with the FAA approving it enthusiastically because it met with their functional requirements and it met their budget. And I went to the Board of Airport Commissioners, who in theory had no authority whatsoever on the approval of the tower. But theory is nice, and reality is another thing. And the Board of Airport Commissioners thought that anything in their airport they ought to have had design control on. And they thought this was weird looking. Their staff neglected to mention that we had been meeting with them every other week and keeping them informed of the process. And so they started to tear it apart. And some of you may remember a certain gentleman by the name of Johnny Cochran, who happened to be serving on the Board of Airport Commissioners at the time. And so I've had the pleasure of being grilled personally by Johnny Cochran, who was suggesting that we take various pieces off and eliminate things. And the good news was that all of the things that they were suggesting be eliminated were in fact functional. The first thing they proposed was to take all of the balconies off that serve the radar. And I said, well, you know, Commissioner, I think that would be problematic because in fact, that's a functional requirement of the FAA. The next thing they proposed to take off were the sort of trunks or struts. I said, well, that's nice, but you know, there's nothing holding the wings up if you take those struts off. So those are functional, those are structural elements. You can't really eliminate them. And at about that point, as we were kind of going back and forth, I said, you know, Commissioners, maybe what we really need is a continuance of this item. I noticed that your agenda only had 10 minutes allocated to us. We've already gone to 20. Maybe you really want to meet with me individually, and we'll review this. This is a much too detailed and complicated project for you to review in 10 minutes here, and shouldn't we take the time? And Johnny Cochran said, that's pretty good for an architect. And I said, Commissioner, I can count votes. And he said, you're right, you would lose today, but because you're smart enough to ask for a continuance, I'm going to give you that continuance. So this is the point when, in fact, my politics and my connections did matter. Elise came down personally to lobby for it. Friends of the commissioners called them to tell them that I was a good architect and a good person and that they should therefore vote for the tower. The mayor called Al Nodell and said to him, my airport commissioners are really unhappy, what the hell should I do? And Al Nodell said, you should back your cultural affairs commissioners because they're right, it's a good design. And we all held our breath, and I counted votes. I had one judge who said to me, you know, a very, very good friend of mine is a client of yours, and she tells me I should vote for your project, but I really can't. I think it's terribly weird looking, and I won't vote for it, but I will be absent the day that you appear. Good deal. So I had 6 commissioners who were going to vote yes, 1 commissioner who was going to be gone, and the day before I was going back to the Board of Airport Commissioners, I think there were actually only 5, so I had 4 commissioners who were going to vote yes. We had a lovely opinion piece in the LA Times. One of the pleasures of doing high-profile architecture is that they take pot shots at you. And this lovely person, Robert Jones, who had never seen the project, who had a faxed copy of a study model from one view, decided it was an abomination and that he was an architectural critic and knew better than anyone else that this shouldn't be built. And on the second page of the first section of the LA Times, I opened up to find this lovely thing about how the Board of Airport Commissioners should be heroes and turn down the project. And I quickly called every one of my 4 votes. Johnny was in the Black Caucus in Washington, D.C. and said, is this LA Times article going to impress you at all? And he said, anyone the LA Times picks on is a friend of mine. It only reinforces my vote. So with a delay of 2 weeks, we went back to the Board of Airport Commissioners and got their unanimous approval of all 4 that were there, with the judge missing in action. And that meant that while we hadn't quite hit the 4-month deadline, we had made it within 4 months and 2 weeks, and the FAA was extremely pleased with us. Part of the process of getting that approval was we did this really ugly rendering. Really bad. And we did this good model that had lights that turned on and off. Clients like toys. So they could turn the lights on and off, and they were completely distracted. And we claimed that we had made 35 major changes in the design in response to their sensitivities. Now, I want you to understand, no, that's the wrong side. If you look at the model on the right in this, and the final built project, you're not going to see an awful lot of difference. This was a study model, right? This is the final product. We were going through design development to get to there. All we did was do things like we had discovered it was too expensive to have the wings as wide as we had them, so we trimmed them. But that counted as one critical thing we had changed to make the commission happy. We counted the fact that we changed the wing form from a red finish to the gunmetal gray. We counted everything we could think of that we had changed and we had to add an exit stair because the city of Los Angeles never adopted the UBC chapter for air traffic control towers, so this was plan checked as a high-rise office building. It has one 4-hour stair. I negotiated with Wayne Martin for a total of, I think, 67 building code modifications in order to get this thing approved. The final blow was that Holmes and Narvert, who did an extraordinarily good job of completing that process of negotiation, tried to take it to get ADA compliance, to get handicapped accessibility compliance, and the Board of Disabled Access wanted, because the elevator does not go up to the cab because it would block the view, they wanted us to provide the same function on a lower floor. So the FAA said at that point, we won't pull a permit from the city of Los Angeles. We've complied with everything we consider rational. We're just going to build the thing. So despite all rumors to all of the things that we changed and all the compromises we had to make, I'd like you to know that through careful politicking, careful communication, and the support of people who cared about design, in fact, we built the tower essentially the way it was designed and envisioned. A little bit late in the process, Sheila Klein became involved as an artist providing the 1% for art. The FAA really didn't want to do it. And on your left, you see all of Sheila's original designs for the artwork. She used to have all of these great ideas about how the artwork would eat the building, and I would remind her that she had a $90,000 budget and I had a $20 million budget, and that maybe she needed to scale these things down. And then in the end, I think she's produced a really wonderful piece. The cables are not structural. They are, again, Mike Ishler had to step in to help her convince the Holmes and Narver engineers that they would not be a structural problem, let alone support anything. And the strange piece on the trunk of the tower is an art piece in the form of the egg of the El Segundo. You'll know all of the stories. This is secret information, you know. Very few people know it. It's the egg of the El Segundo blue butterfly that's going extinct because of the development of the airport. It's all done with runway lights. It's meant to represent a radar screen capturing the lighting, etc. Another collaborative element of the design of this project was the landscape, which in a sense is almost non-existent. But the plaza, which is both the parking and the lobby, was designed with Pamela Burton and Katie Spitz back when they were in partnership as a landscape viewed from the sky, and became a critical part of making the lobby space really successful with very low budget finishes and materials. Unfortunately, as you can well guess, the tower is not a public building in the sense of allowing for tours. Security is a critical component. And in fact, I'm really not allowed to photograph the cab level. The other point is that the cab where the air traffic controllers do all of their work is absolutely the prototype, because the prototype is replicated across the country, and air traffic controllers train in various places, and I really want them to be able to come here and find the piece of equipment where they expect to find it. So that was one of those things that in the process of deconstructing the original prototype design, we did not change one iota. And the tower, I hope, with its base building of office components and its transparent lobby space, is both viable and powerful during the day and at night. The wing component that connects the two pieces houses the computer floor that has all of the equipment that's supporting the air traffic controllers up above. The roof of this is actually an open-air balcony, and the top floor level is a break room. And the rest of this is basically an office component that supports the FAA's use of the tower. The tower, as I said, is occupied on 2 floors, the control tower floor and a break room floor right below it. Everything else is a stair shaft, an elevator shaft, and cable trays. And ultimately, I would hope that the tower does one of those important challenges of architecture. It takes advantage of a highly technical, completely function-driven, programmatic set of requirements and transforms them into a cultural, civic symbol. Hollywood is already using it as the clear symbol of arrival in Los Angeles. And I hope that it will become, in its composition with the theme restaurant, the defining image of arrival here. Thank you. I'd be willing to take questions if there are any. On the other hand, I know there are people running back because you're in the middle of finishing things up from studio. Done.